In today's video, we're going to do an employee satisfaction survey, and we'll show you how to basically use Microsoft Forms to do this. And as we can see here, that we've got our start screen, and then we have a couple of questions here, and then we've got branching logic. So if we select an individual contributor, we go to the general employee experience here. And if we hit the back button and we select the manager, we'll see that we go to a manager specific question, and then we can kind of select through here and then get to the general employee experience. And then I'll explain how to add a net promoter score, these Likert questions, and how you could set up the rest of the survey. And then also to explain how this works with the individual form. So if you use Microsoft Forms and don't associate it with a group, and then I show you how to actually associate it with a group. If you decide to change your mind at a later time, you can do that. Then we talk a little bit about the visualizations that you get out of the box with Microsoft Forms here. And then we also talk about the Excel as well as where it's stored. Now in this case, I've already moved it over to the group, so we're seeing that it's in a group location. And then we talk about whether these things are anonymous or not. And as we can see here, we selected anonymous, but spoiler alert, it's not actually anonymous, and I'm going to explain why it's part of this video. If you like this kind of content, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really does help the channel grow. All right, let's go ahead and jump right in. So the first thing we're going to do is a Microsoft form using Microsoft Forms, not the SharePoint version, just the standard Microsoft Forms. To get here, all you have to do is in Microsoft 365, just come up here and you'll see Forms as an option. That's how you can navigate here. You can select a group here and create it as part of a group, or you can just kind of go ahead and create it, and you can always associate it with a group at a later point. Let's go ahead and we're going to create a employee satisfaction survey. And fortunate for us, there is a template for that. So if we come down here, there's a lot of different templates in here. So I would always start here to see if there's anything that's similar to what you're trying to do. And it might give you some good question options, or it might at least give you the ability to take something and modify it to meet what you're trying to do. Now in this case, we have an employee satisfaction survey. So let's go ahead and start here. And you can adjust all of this on the side here, so we can select other templates if we want to. And we can also adjust this by just kind of selecting here. So if we want to have a different name, we can do that. Or if we don't want the date here, we can go ahead and just remove the date from that. And then you can change the text in this box here if you want to. In this case, we're not going to do too many more things here. You can come up here and hit the style button, and then you can make some adjustments. And kind of a fun one is this background music, that they've got the option to add some of these other background music options in here. I like that option, but for this one, we're not going to add that in there. And then you can also select from all these different backgrounds here. So if you don't like this, you can select these different options here. But we could also try some of these other ones if we want to see how they look. In this case, I think this one makes sense for an employee satisfaction survey. Now we can also change the layout here if we wanted to switch to say something like this, where it gets rid of that top border. And in this case, I actually think this works better for employee satisfaction, but you can keep these other different options that you've got here. So whatever makes sense for your situation here. I don't particularly like the you are invited. I kind of wish for a template they would actually put some kind of baseline information in here that would actually matter for an employee satisfaction survey. For example, usually it's some sort of directions that you might want to put in here. And again, you can still edit everything after you make those changes here. Now let's go ahead and check out the settings to see the options that we've got here. Now, you may not have all these options depending on your organization. A lot of times organizations get rid of the option for anonymous submissions. You can select anyone can respond in most organizations, but in things like the federal government, for example, a lot of times they've got this disabled. They are working to enable this in most organizations. And then you've got the option again, if you want to make it anonymous, then you would get rid of the record name. Now, in the case of an employee satisfaction survey, you probably don't want people to submit multiple surveys. So you would normally select something like this to prevent that. Now, interestingly enough, you can unselect this. In previous versions of this, you had to have record name in order to do one response per person. So how do you confirm that it's only one response per person if you're not recording information about who submitted it? And this is my way of saying there really isn't an anonymous option these days, even though there is the option to kind of make it seem like it's anonymous. There really isn't an anonymous option. What we're really talking about is the level of difficulty to determine who did what. But for the most part, anything that you do in today's digital world can be tracked back to you. You can make it much more difficult to track it back to you, but pretty much everything can be tracked back, whether it's through IP addresses or browser information or login, obviously the login option here. Now, if we open this up to anyone can respond, that might be a little bit more difficult. You don't even have the option anymore of limiting it to just one person. So the only time that you can do that is when you're selecting these more specific options here that allow for one response per person. So it's a little bit harder for this because these two rely on you logging in. So again, even though you're not recording the name, you're logged in, there is information about the user that is being recorded that allows for them to confirm that you're only submitting one response. So again, not really anonymous, even though it is more difficult to determine who did what. This is my way of saying anonymous for your work environment is probably a pipe dream, so I wouldn't anticipate actual anonymity for completing these things. So probably best to ignore that across the board anyway. Now we have the options down here. We can put a start date, end date. So if we want the survey only to be available for certain periods of time, you can also shuffle the questions. Now, in the case of an employee satisfaction survey, probably not going to shuffle the questions. You can disable the question numbers, hide submit another response. So essentially just, get rid of the ability to submit another response. In the case of an employee satisfaction survey, that probably makes sense, is to not make it readily easily for them to submit another option there. If you want to customize the thank you message, allow them to edit their responses, and then a couple of other response receipt options down here that we can also set. For this one, this is going to be sufficient here. So we'll just close this out here. And then we've got our survey. And you can see we've got a lot of great questions to start. What is your job role? Now for this one, let's go ahead and we're going to actually limit this down. We're not going to have a team lead. We're just going to have the manager and the individual contributor. And then we're going to get rid of the other options so they can only choose between one or two of these, and we're going to make that a required field. Now in this case, you can't be a contributor and a manager, so we don't have to worry about the multiple answers option here. And then you've got the how long have you been in this organization. Now, if you're working inside the federal government, you might want to expand this to be maybe 10 years or 15 years so that you can really get a sense for how long somebody's been in the government. I think in corporate life, 5 years is probably, you're getting pretty old at that point. So this is probably built more for small businesses where you have a much higher turnover rate than, say, federal government, where you're usually working there for 20, 25 years, basically until retirement age, a lot of times for that workforce. And then what is your age group? A lot of times I actually don't know that this one matters as much as this one. So if you're looking to trim down your survey, this might be one that you just select here and go ahead and delete out of here. It's probably not as important. In today's world, a lot of people might take that as some sort of ageism type question. And then we've got overall, how satisfied are you with the current employer? And that's a pretty good setup there. And then let's go ahead and look at the rest of these. How strongly do you agree or disagree with the following statements about your career opportunities? Now, this is a pretty standard employee satisfaction question. And then we've got our please provide your feedback on company leadership. So what do you think about your managers, essentially? How strongly do you agree or disagree with the following statements around your pay and benefits? I think most people these days say I am not paid fairly, so they'd probably say strongly disagree. I feel my pay is fair compared with people in similar roles in other organizations. So yeah, a couple good pay related questions. I think for the most part, most people these days, especially with how expensive everything is probably going to say that they don't like their pay in comparison to how costly it is. And then we've got, please provide feedback on communication with your organization. Communication is always a hot button topic within organizations. So I would definitely agree that's a great question to include in the survey. And then any other feedback you want to provide. These, in my opinion, are actually some of the better things, because you can actually take a look at these comments and see all the stuff that these questions don't talk about. What are the other issues that are in your organization? So I actually really enjoy free text questions like this, where the user can kind of type in exactly what they're looking for, and it will be probably a long answer. So yeah, pretty good question basis so far for this survey. We are going to add a couple questions in here. So let's go ahead and select here, and we're going to insert a new question, but in this case, we're going to add a section. And I like sections. And for this section, we're going to call this our respondent information. I think that looks good. And let's go ahead and move this right here, and we'll get rid of this. So we've got our section 1 respondent information. What is your role? How long you've been in the organization? How satisfied are you with your current employer? Now for this section, let's go ahead and move this right here. So we want to say how long you've been in the organization, and then you want to say what is your role. Now the reason why we're doing this, I actually agree that this setup was right before, but if we want to do branching where we add questions for, say, a manager, most of these other questions apply to everybody, but if we wanted to add manager-specific questions, branching requires that it goes in a specific order. So the next question, if they select manager, has to be manager questions that are become visible. So we're going to go ahead and select this, and then we're going to go ahead and insert a new question. And let's go ahead and add a Likert option in here. And for this question, we're going to say, all right, I think that looks pretty good there. So we've added 3 questions here. I'm enabled to support my employees. I have adequate tools and resources to manage my employees. And the organization has provided adequate training to ensure my success as a manager. And then we've got the how strongly do you agree or disagree. So we've essentially got a pretty good question here that follows our manager. Now what we want to do is come down here and we want to say add branching. And for this one, we want it to go to question number 4. So we're just going to leave it as next. And we're going to come up here for this one. And we're going to say for individual contributor, we want to go to question number 4. And if it's the manager, we want it to go to our question number 3. So essentially manager will get this question, individual contributor will go to this question here. Now let's go ahead and preview this and we'll see how this looks. So let's come to preview here and we'll say start now. And then we got our branching logic here. So it'll be just like this, and then we'll select manager. And then we get question 3 and we'll see question 4. Now if we select individual contributor, all we see is question 3. So that's how our branching logic works. Now let's go back over here and edit this again. So we've got our first 2 questions, then we've got our branch logic here, then we've got our overall how satisfied are you with your current employer. Now let's go ahead and add another question. So we'll insert a question right here. And now we're going to do a net promoter score question. And for this question, let's go ahead and say, on a scale of 0 to 10, how likely are you to recommend your workplace to others? That's a great net promoter score question here. We'll go ahead and make that required also. And we're going to make all of the questions in here required if I haven't been doing that so far. Now, we can't do branching logic based off of a score of 0 to 6 for your detractors or your passives from 7 to 8 or your promoters of 9 and 10. So unfortunately, we can't do branching logic like that with how Microsoft Forms or even SharePoint Forms allow you to do things. So that's not an option currently for this. All right, I think we've got enough questions. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that everything is set as required here. All right, let's go ahead and preview this and see how everything works. So we've got our start screen here, and we'll go ahead and say less than a year, and we'll say individual contributor. And I'm somewhat dissatisfied with my current employer. He's a slave driver under these Office Solutions Pro architecture here. And we'll go ahead and select a 2, and then we'll just kind of do random things here. And then we'll come down here and we'll do kind of the same thing. And then we'll do the same thing here. Now, this one is not a required field, but as we can see with the asterisk here, this is. If I try to submit this, we're going to see that it's required. I have to complete this. And if we go ahead and submit this, we'll see that, again, I'm required to do all of them. And there we go. Now I can submit this, and we've got our response was submitted. And again, you can adjust the thank you screen. Let's go ahead and save my response. And we can see that we've got our form and our response here. And if we go ahead and take a look at this again, let's go ahead and open this up. And we can see we've got our collect responses here, so we can set the got it. And if we click the collect responses option here, what we're going to get is the ability to copy this link so we can send it out to people. And we can continue to adjust our settings also in here, at least for the who do we want to collect it from. And we can go ahead and check out our response here and see what we get. And again, we've got some pretty good visualizations that are in here on actually seeing these things. And we can open this up in Excel if we want to here as well. All right, let's go back to our questions here and we'll finish adjustments here. So we've got our section 1, which is our respondent information. And then this is really our section. So let's go ahead and add a section here. And this is going to be our general employee experience. So that'll be for questions 4 and beyond. And let's go ahead up here and we'll insert a section right here. And this is going to be for our management questions. So that'll be management support. Now what we want to do is make sure that we take a look at our branching here, since we added sections. And for our individual contributor, we want them to go to our section 3. And for our manager, we want them to go to our management support. And then after management support, we want them to go to our general employee experience. Let's go ahead and preview this now. So we'll hit back and preview. And then we'll start this and we'll say, okay, here, and then we'll say a manager, and the manager is going to do the manager questions, and then hit next, and then they're going to get the general employee experience questions. That works perfectly. So let's go ahead and hit the back button here, and we'll preview this for the contributor now. So if they got less than a year, individual contributor, and we'll hit next, then they're getting the general employee experience section. So it's working exactly the way that we want it to work. We could add more sections if we wanted to, but for the most part, all of these questions apply to everybody. You might want to put this in a separate section also. So it kind of is the conclusion to the survey on that last screen there. For our purposes here, we're not going to go through and do that. This is working exactly the way we want to. All right, let's go ahead and hit the back button here and view our responses and talk about this a little bit. Now, we can look at everything in our Excel documents, and if we look at this, we can see that it's in a specific location. Let's go ahead and open this up. And if you remember, we selected not to record the name. So we can see that it is anonymous here. But if we come up here and we look at our version history, we're going to see that I have edited this. And this is essentially what's going to happen every time somebody completes a survey. So is that anonymous? I would say no. Is it more difficult to know who did what? Absolutely. But it is not anonymous. We know exactly who has completed the survey because of the version history. And this is kind of what I was talking about with that anonymous. Nothing's truly anonymous, whether you're using SharePoint or whether you're using a Canvas app or a model-driven app or pretty much any resource inside of the Microsoft ecosystem or inside of any computer. It is really hard for true anonymous actions, because even on portals that don't record your IP address and everything else, there's almost always a way to track down who did what digitally in today's world. So again, that's why I don't focus too much on the question of whether it's anonymous or not. From the purpose of the people that are taking the survey, if it's your policy that you're not going to try to track down who did what, that should be sufficient. But realizing it's always possible to see who did what. Let's go ahead and hit the back button here. And let's talk about this for a second. So we can actually find this document. So let's go ahead and click this. And we'll find this document right here. And if we open this up, we'll see it is our Excel. So essentially, when you create a Microsoft form, you have this Excel file that's saved in your OneDrive. Now, you can leverage this and actually use this for Canvas apps and other things. So you could actually use this, if you wanted to, as part of a Canvas app. So let's say you wanted to use a Microsoft form, and then you wanted to build some sort of a Canvas app to either summarize this or to be able to interact with this in some other way. You could do that, or you could create another interface. For example, maybe you don't like the Microsoft form for every situation, and you want to have a customized version that is a little bit different. Maybe you want to use stars instead of drop-down boxes or something like that. And you know you can do that with a Canvas app. You could build this in a Canvas app and actually use both to do updates to this Excel. We're going to cover those kinds of things in future videos, but I did want to explain that the contents of the surveys are here in a OneDrive Excel file. Now, in this case, it's stored in the individual OneDrive versus a shared location. Now, you can share this file out, but again, what happens if I leave the organization? This survey could die with that exit, so you probably don't want to leave it in your individual OneDrive. So if we go back to our survey, and if we take a look at our form here, what we have the option to do is to move to a group, and we can actually move this into a team or a group that we've created. And when we do that, it's going to move our Excel file over there also. So let's go ahead and open up our team here, and then we'll see that we've got our form and the response moved. So if we go ahead and hit the view responses here, and we open it up in Excel, we can now go up here and we'll see that it is stored in our Office Solutions Pro team shared documents location. Now, again, this file is now shared with everybody that is there. So pretty much everybody can come here and access this at any time they want. So just be aware of that also. But when I leave the organization, the file isn't going to be lost, or the potential for the file to get lost is no longer there. Now, some other things to kind of consider with how these Microsoft Forms work. The things that are stored in here are maybe not what you're looking for. Let's say you're trying to put this into, say, a Power BI or some other like Tableau type visualization. You may have more challenges working with answers like this versus, say, number answers. If you built this, say, using SharePoint or Dataverse with a Canvas app, you have a lot more flexibility on how this is stored, and you can also do some calculated fields and things like that. So you could do some more modifications a little bit easier with that, but some things are a little bit harder with those. And again, we're going to cover all of those examples for how to set this up in those tools also in future content. Now, if you found this content helpful, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. It really does help the channel grow. That's pretty much it for today's video. Until next time.